There's a special kind of cold reserved for the person who pays for the holiday dinner while being served insults for dessert. My name is Lucy Adams, and for years I was the responsible one. I was the one who paid the bills, fixed the fights, and swallowed the disrespect, all to keep the holiday peace in my family's home. But this year I found proof my sister wasn't just manipulative, she was planning to steal it all. The question was, could I find the strength to stop being the family doormat, even if it meant blowing up my entire life? Here is my story. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The Schuylkill Expressway was jammed as always, but the gridlock felt symbolic. Driving back to my parents' home in suburban Pennsylvania always felt less like a homecoming and more like a summons. My apartment in NYC isn't large, and the life I've built is modest by any standard, but it's mine. Here I'm just a role the fixer, the ATM, the invisible support beam holding up a crumbling facade. I pulled into the driveway, the old oak tree dropping its last dead leaves onto my windshield, a perfect metaphor for the welcome I expected. I wasn't inside for 30 seconds before the weight settled on me. The kitchen was a wreck from my father's breakfast, and a polite but firm red envelope from the utility company sat on the counter. I'd already paid it online 2 days ago, routing the funds from my savings account because Dad's hours at the plant had been cut again, a fact he'd rather ignore than discuss. He wouldn't mention the bill, and I wouldn't mention I'd paid it. This was the silent, toxic contract we operated under. "Lucy's here," my mother Evelyn called out, her voice thin with a forced holiday cheer she always wore like armor. "Thank God," a second voice trilled. "Maya." My younger sister drifted into the kitchen wrapped in a silk robe I was pretty sure I had paid for. She was all charm and bright smiles, a vortex of entitlement disguised as sweetness. "I'm starving and Mom's stressed about the turkey." She didn't offer to help, just opened the fridge I was meant to fill. "Ugh, nothing. Lucy, you have to go to the store." I nodded, already making the list in my head. "Fine, but I need to—" "Where are my keys?" I patted my pockets. Maya just smiled, unapologetic. "Oh, I borrowed your car. The Prius is just so much better on gas than my SUV. It's at the mall. I Ubered back." She'd taken my car. To the mall. "Maya, I needed that—" "Don't worry," she cut me off. "I'll need you to pick it up later." She fluttered away, leaving me to find a ride from my father Tom, who grumbled about the football game. At the grocery store, wading through the pre-Thanksgiving chaos, my phone buzzed. A credit card alert. $150 at Artisan Web Designs. My card. Not hers. My stomach tightened. Another business scheme. Last month it was boutique candles. This month she was an influencer consultant. All funded by me, the responsible one, the one who budgeted her own life down to the penny. I swallowed the acid in my throat. I bought the turkey, the cranberries, the potatoes, and the wine, the mandatory anesthetic for the next 72 hours. I paid for it all. I cooked. I cleaned. I mediated the argument between Dad and Mom about the stuffing. I did it because it was easier than the alternative. If I stopped, the whole fragile ecosystem of holiday peace would collapse. Evelyn would get migraines. Tom would retreat to the garage. My loyalty, my sense of responsibility was the glue, and they were all counting on it. I felt the familiar, quiet resentment building a cold stone in my stomach, but I pushed it down. This was just what Thanksgiving was. The dinner itself was a masterclass in subtle humiliations. Maya was holding court, telling a story about her disaster at the mall, the one she'd driven my car to. And the valet just looked at me like I was crazy. I guess he doesn't see many people that fashionable in a beat-up Prius. She laughed, and my parents laughed with her. It's not beat up, Maya, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. And you should have asked before you took it. The laughter died. My father sighed, that heavy, disappointed sound reserved just for me. Lucy, don't start. It's Thanksgiving. My mother jumped in, her hands fluttering. Yes, dear, she was just telling a story. Don't ruin the mood. Maya just smirked, taking a bite of pie. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I forgot how sensitive you are. Must be all that big city stress. They chuckled again, a quiet shaming. I was the problem. Not her entitlement, not her theft. My reaction. Later that night, long after everyone was asleep, I stood in the kitchen scrubbing the roasting pan. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I looked at the reflection of the kitchen lights in the dark window. I was the invisible sacrifice. I paid the bills, I absorbed the insults, I cooked the meal, and I washed the dishes, all so they could have their peace. But looking at the congealed gravy in the sink, I felt something new settle alongside the resentment. A limit. A cold, hard line in the snow I hadn't realized was there. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the November air, that I was standing right on the edge of it. The day after Thanksgiving, the first cracks appeared, spiderwebbing through the thin ice of our family peace. The small betrayals, which I usually brushed off, began to accumulate, stacking up like unwashed plates. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, the one I'd had since high school, needing a few hours to plug in and get some remote work done before the weekend. The door was open and I found Maya inside, directing my father as he moved my old desk. My suitcase, which I'd left by the bed, was now in the hallway. What's going on? I asked, my voice flat. Maya gave me a brilliant, pitying smile. Oh, Lucy, thank God you're here. I just desperately need this room for my new consulting work. The light is so much better for my video calls and you're barely ever here anyway. Dad agreed, it makes sense. My father just grunted, avoiding my eyes. She needs the space, Luce. You can take the guest room in the basement. The basement. The cold, damp room with the single window that looked out onto a concrete well. It wasn't a request, it was a reassignment. I felt a hot flash of humiliation. But before I could argue, my Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike arrived, their arms full of leftover containers. Lucy, look at you, Aunt Carol chirped, oblivious. Maya's telling us all about her new business, so impressive. I was dismissed, relegated to the hallway with my luggage, while my sister accepted congratulations in her newly conquered territory. Later, I settled into the basement dungeon and reached into my bag for my laptop charger. It was gone. I knew with a sickening certainty where it was. I also noticed the notification on my phone, a $50 withdrawal from my Venmo account sent to Maya. The memo line just said, supplies. I found her in the kitchen scrolling through her phone while my mother cleaned around her. I waited until Mom was in the pantry. Maya, I need my charger back, and you need to stop taking money from my accounts. Her head snapped up, her expression shifting instantly from boredom to performative offense. What are you talking about? I just borrowed the charger, and that $50 was for the extra cranberries and stuff I had to get yesterday. You went to the mall, Maya. I bought the groceries. God, Lucy, why are you so sensitive? She hissed, her voice low. You're always overreacting. It's just a charger. You're trying to make me look bad, aren't you? Just because you're stressed. It was textbook gaslighting, so polished I could almost admire the craft. Before I could respond, my parents drifted in. Everything okay in here? My father asked, his eyes already on the football game summary. Lucy's just being dramatic. Maya said, her eyes filling with strategic tears. She's accusing me of stealing. I'm not. I started, but my father cut me off. Lucy, for God's sake, stop it. We're trying to have a nice weekend. Whatever it is, drop it. My mother just looked at me, her expression pleading. Please, Lucy, don't ruin the holidays. Not this year. My protests died in my throat, choked by the familiar expectation. I was the peacemaker, which meant I was the one expected to swallow the poison. I retreated to the basement, the silence buzzing. My inner monologue was a battlefield, the ingrained sense of familial duty warring with the screaming, desperate need for self-respect. "She's your sister. Just let it go. It's easier." But the other voice, the one I'd nurtured in New York, was louder this time. Duty doesn't mean being a doormat. Respect is a two-way street. I pulled out my phone and texted the only person who would understand. "Jenna, I'm losing my mind. My family is a black hole of entitlement." The reply was almost instantaneous. Jenna Morales. The Addams Family Thanksgiving. Say no more. Remember, no is a complete sentence, and "that's my money" is a follow-up. Her words were a small, warm light in the damp basement. They gave me enough validation to just breathe. That night, the house finally quiet. I was getting a glass of water when I heard Maya's voice drifting from the back patio. She was on the phone, her voice pitched low but arrogant. "I know, right? It's just so much better now. I finally have the house my way. Once Lucy realizes she's not the center of the universe, everything will be perfect. She'll keep paying, she always does." A cold, sharp clarity cut through my resentment. She wasn't just careless. She was calculated. She wasn't just my sister. She was my antagonist. And I, the invisible sacrifice, had been funding my own demotion. I stood there in the dark kitchen, the weight of home pressing down on me, and I made a decision. The peace they wanted was too expensive. I wouldn't be the family fixer anymore. I would not yell. I would not confront, not yet. I would pull back. I would watch. My transformation from passive caretaker to strategic actor had begun not with a bang, but with a silent, frozen resolve. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas were a study in calculated withdrawal. I returned to New York, but the distance felt different. It was no longer just geographical. It was strategic. My first act of quiet rebellion was financial. I went into my bank account and rerouted the automatic payments I'd been making for my parents' mortgage and utilities. I didn't stop them entirely. I couldn't let the house go into foreclosure, but I reduced them by half. I then set up a new alert one that notified me of the exact day the bills were due. I would pay them manually at the last possible second, ensuring the buffer of my money they'd enjoyed was gone. Next, I started keeping records. I created a spreadsheet, a digital ledger of my own sacrifice, logging the Venmo loans, the credit card charges, the borrowed cash. I downloaded bank statements, took screenshots of Maya's manipulative texts about needing help, and saved the email from my father gently reminding me the property taxes were due. I was building a case, though I wasn't yet sure who the jury would be. Emotionally, I built a fortress. I let Maya's texts go unanswered for hours, then days. My conversations with my mother became polite, brief, and shallow. I was no longer the family's emotional sponge, and the void I left seemed to make them all uneasy. The calls became more frequent, more demanding as Christmas approached, but I held my ground, citing work projects and a demanding boss. I was simply suddenly unavailable. I returned to Pennsylvania on December 23rd, not for the family, but for the evidence. I arrived in the middle of a freak snowstorm, the heavy wet flakes sticking to the windows, making the house feel like a snow globe, a perfect preserved scene of warmth that felt utterly suffocating. The tension was immediate. My reduced contributions had, as expected, caused a ripple. "We almost had a late fee on the electric, Lucy," my mother said, her voice tight with disapproval as I unpacked. "You've always just handled it." "My finances are a little tighter this month, Mom," I said coolly, not looking at her. "I'm sure you and Dad can manage." The real betrayal, however, was saved for the annual community Christmas gathering at the town hall. It was a mandatory appearance, a tradition of cider and forced smiles. I was handing out programs when Maya found me, my father in tow. She wasn't smiling. "Lucy, we need to talk," she said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors, the Pearsons and the Garcias, to turn their heads. Dad was just looking at the heating bill, and there's an account mismanagement fee. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? I paid it. You underpaid it, Maya announced, her voice ringing with false concern. And now they've added a penalty. Dad had to pull money from his savings. My father just looked at the floor, shuffling his feet. We rely on you for this, Luce, he mumbled. The shame was suffocating, immediate. They were looking at me, my aunt, my old high school teachers, all hearing that I, the responsible one, had fumbled the one thing I was supposedly good for. I paid what the bill stated. I said, my voice low, but Maya just barreled over me. It's okay, she said, actually patting my arm. I know you're stressed. I'll just take over the family finances from now on. It's clearly too much for you. She looked so concerned, so capable. And I looked like an incompetent, resentful child. My parents just nodded, a subtle, sickening shift of allegiance. My mother, seeing the scene, hurried over. Oh dear, let's not discuss this now, she whispered, grabbing my elbow. Maya's just trying to help. That's when I saw it. My silence had been misinterpreted as agreement. My willingness to absorb the blows had been seen as an invitation for more. The peace I had worked so hard to maintain had come at the non-negotiable price of my own dignity. I left the gathering, walking home through the snow. The winter air bit at my face, a clean, sharp pain that was almost a relief after the suffocating, cloying warmth of the hall. The snow muffled the sound of the world, and in that quiet I felt my resolve harden from ice into steel. I got back to the house, went down to the cold basement room, and pulled out my laptop. My strategic preparation was no longer a vague idea. It was a necessity. I documented the scene at the hall, every word, every passive-aggressive glance. I pulled the actual utility bill from my email, highlighting the amount due and my matching payment confirmation. I opened the file on Maya's business and started cross-referencing the dates of her Venmo requests with her Instagram posts. The pattern was undeniable. She wasn't just manipulative, she was methodical. As I was saving the file, a new email popped up. It wasn't from family. It was from a paralegal services address I didn't recognize, with a subject line, Re Adams Estate Query. I opened it. The message was cryptic, just a brief line confirming a consultation about accelerated use property transfers and a date. The consultation wasn't for me. The name on the request was Maya Adams. She wasn't just trying to take over the bills, she was making a financial maneuver to control the entire family estate. Christmas Eve dinner was the final performance. The house was draped in tinsel, and my mother's forced brightness, the air thick with the smell of roasting ham and unspoken grievances. We sat at the dining room table, the good china vibrating slightly every time my father refilled his wineglass. The email about the estate query sat like a block of ice in my stomach. I was quiet, observing a ghost at my own execution. Maya, of course, was radiant high on her successful coup at the town hall. She'd saved the family finances, and she was playing the role of the benevolent matriarch in training. It's just such a relief, she said, raising her glass to my father, that we've got the accounts sorted out. Things were getting so messy. She didn't look at me, but the comment was a guided missile. I said nothing, just cut my ham. My silence was her invitation. I'm just glad I could step in, she continued, turning to my mother. You know, while Lucy is off in New York living her, well, whatever that life is. She laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I mean, a content coordinator at a small blog. It's sweet, Lucy, really. It's like a hobby. But we're dealing with real assets here. The house, Dad's pension. Maya, that's enough, my mother murmured, her eyes darting to me with a familiar plea. Don't react. But my father just grunted. She's not wrong. We need someone serious looking after things. Someone who's here. I put my fork down. The click was loud in the sudden silence. The hobby you're mocking, I said, my voice dangerously level, is the hobby that paid your car insurance for 6 months. It's the hobby that paid the mortgage you're now trying to steal via a property transfer query. The color drained from Maya's face, replaced by a flash of pure venom. How dare you? You're just jealous. You're jealous that I have a vision, that I'm stepping up while you're running away. You come back here twice a year, act like a martyr, and throw a few dollars at us to make yourself feel superior. You haven't contributed anything real in years. It was the ultimate betrayal, the final perfect inversion of the truth. I looked at my parents, waiting. Please, I thought, say something, defend me, tell the truth. My father slammed his hand on the table. Stop it, both of you. Lucy, you've ruined Christmas Eve. You come in here with this anger, and you ruin it after all your sister is doing for this family. My mother just stared at her plate, her lips a thin white line. She was a statue of inaction. They didn't just fail to intervene, they co-signed the lie. In that moment, the deep foundational sorrow I'd been carrying fractured, and a cold, liberating rage flooded in. This wasn't just injustice, it was a choice. They were choosing her, choosing the lie because it was easier. All my sacrifices, the thousands of dollars, the missed opportunities, the years of swallowing my own needs, they weren't contributions. They were just entry fees for my own humiliation. My internal monologue, which had always been a debate between duty and self-respect, fell silent. There was no debate left. The American values I'd built my New York life on: independence, personal freedom, the right to my own hard-earned success, they didn't just justify my stepping away, they demanded it. I would not subsidize this. I would not mediate this. I would not be the emotional collateral for their dysfunction. I stood up. You're right, Dad. I am angry. My voice was calm, hollow. Please excuse me. I walked out of the dining room. I didn't go to the basement. I went to the hall closet where my coat and bag were. I pulled on my boots. I could hear their voices, first muffled, then rising. Lucy, Lucy, where are you going? Get back here. I walked to the front door, my keys in my hand. I didn't pack. I didn't take a single thing from the basement room. I was leaving it all. I walked out into the falling snow, the cold a sharp, clean slap. The streets were quiet houses glowing with warm lights, perfect little scenes of holiday peace that felt like a mockery. I drove, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers and my own ragged breathing. I wasn't crying. I was empty. The snowy roads muffled the world. I drove for an hour aimless until I saw the flickering neon sign of a motel vacancy glowing red against the white landscape. The room was beige and anonymous, smelling of industrial cleaner. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. I sat on the edge of the stiff bedspread, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm in my head. I realized home wasn't a place. It wasn't a building you paid a mortgage on or a table you set for dinner. It was a feeling of safety, and I was, for the first time in a decade, completely safe. Then a new cold realization set in. Leaving wasn't the end. It was only the first step. They wouldn't just accept this. I had abandoned my post. Maya especially wouldn't let me have this clean break. I had just challenged her control, and she and my parents would push back. This wasn't an escape, it was a declaration of war. I didn't go back to New York, not right away. The idea of returning to my old life as if nothing had happened felt impossible. The break had to be total. The motel lasted 2 days before the sheer anonymity started to feel like a different kind of prison. I found a small furnished sublet in a neighboring town, a one-bedroom apartment over a quiet bookstore. It was sparse with second-hand furniture and drafty windows, but it was mine. I paid the deposit with my own money, signed a lease with my own name, and for the first night, I just sat on the floor eating takeout from a box and breathed. The new financial autonomy was absolute. I changed my passwords, all of them. I put a freeze on my credit. I opened a new bank account at a local credit union and transferred my savings, leaving just enough in the old one to cover my own NYC rent. The silence that followed was deafening. In that quiet, I felt the sharp, jagged edges of grief. This wasn't a triumphant walk-off, it was an amputation. I missed the idea of my family, the mother I wished I had, the father I wanted to respect. I was lonely. But beneath the loneliness, a stronger, brighter feeling was taking root: exhilaration. I woke up when I wanted. I bought groceries for one. I worked my focus sharp, and in the evenings I plotted. I wasn't a vulnerable victim anymore. I was a strategist. "So you've officially gone rogue?" Jenna Morales' voice crackled over FaceTime, her face a welcome grounding sight. "I'm proud of you, Luce, but I'm also worried. What's the endgame here?" "I don't know," I admitted, showing her the spreadsheet I'd started. "Right now, I'm just gathering the evidence. I've got screenshots of the artisan web designs charged, the paralegal email, the Venmo history. It's all here." "Good," she said, her expression serious. "Don't just get mad, get data. She's banking on you being the emotional, hysterical daughter. You have to be the accountant." Her practical advice was the anchor I needed. I wasn't just hiding, I was building a fortress of facts. I printed out the utility bill from the town hall incident, highlighting my payment confirmation next to the mismanagement fee Maya had clearly incurred herself. I found two old friends from high school and over coffee listened as they recounted how Maya had been telling people I'd had a breakdown and abandoned the family. I documented their accounts. The expected pushback from my family finally came, not as a wave, but as a series of manipulative tremors. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Lucy, the bank called," she said, her voice trembling. "The mortgage. It wasn't paid. I paid my portion, Mom. The reduced amount, just like last month. I sent you the confirmation. But it didn't go through. Maya said she couldn't. She said you changed the accounts. Your father is..." "Lucy, this is a mess. Maya's trying to fix it. She's talking to the bank, but she says you've locked her out." "I haven't locked her out of anything she's entitled to," I said, my voice cold. "She has her own income, right? She can pay the other half." The silence on the line was answer enough. Maya's schemes were continuing, but now they were failing. She had successfully taken over a ship I was no longer keeping afloat, and she didn't know how to sail. She was trying to consolidate power, but she'd miscalculated. Her power was entirely dependent on my subsidy. I realized then that my self-reliance was the weapon. My independence was the consequence. I didn't need to confront her directly. I just needed to create an opportunity for her own deceptions to surface in the light. Community accountability, that's what this came down to. Maya's entire identity was built on the perception of others. She had used that against me at the town hall. Now I would use it against her. I just needed the right stage. And then I found it. An email from the local community board forwarded to me by Jenna, who was still on the mailing list. It was an invitation to the annual New Year's Eve charity gala, a toast to the township, organized by a committee of local families. And there, listed as the lead organizer for the event's Family Fund initiative, was Maya Adams. She was set to give a speech. She was going to be on a stage with a microphone in front of the same people she'd lied to about me. It was the perfect opportunity. A public event built on themes of charity and integrity, where my sister, the picture of entitlement, would be at her most confident and her most vulnerable. The New Year's Eve gala was a constellation of manufactured warmth. Twinkling lights were strung from the rented chandeliers, and the town's elite milled about, champagne flutes in hand. Outside the tall windows, snow fell in thick cinematic curtains, muffling the world, creating a perfect backdrop for the drama to come. I walked in with Jenna at my side, her presence a solid grounding force. I wore a simple black dress, the visual opposite of Maya's sparkling sequined gown. I was here not as a guest, but as an observer, a quiet auditor. My parents were already there, flanking Maya at the family fun display, looking proud but visibly strained. Maya was in her element, accepting compliments, her charm turned up to its most blinding wattage. "She's good," Jenna murmured, sipping her cider. "She's a predator," I murmured back, my gaze steady. I felt no nerves, only a cold, surgical calm. I had the small folded sheaf of papers in my clutch, the utility bill, my payment confirmation, the subsequent late fee, the Venmo history, and a printout of the paralegal's email. After a series of self-congratulatory speeches, Maya took the stage. She was brilliant. I had to give her that. She spoke of community, of family values, of the importance of stepping up when others faltered. This year, she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion, my family learned what's truly important. We learned that home isn't a place, it's the people you fight for. A few people dabbed their eyes. My parents looked like they were about to burst with pride. It was nauseating. After the applause died, Maya worked the room. This was my moment. I waited, letting Jenna steer me toward the donation table right where Mr. Henderson, our neighbor and the manager of the local bank, was talking with my father. Maya joined them, accepting Mr. Henderson's praise. Your daughter is a real asset to this town, Tom, he was saying. Just a marvel. Oh, it's nothing, Maya said, waving her hand. Just doing what's right. I'm so glad to hear you say that, Maya, I said, my voice clear and polite, stepping into the small circle. The shift in atmosphere was instantaneous. My father tensed. Maya's smile froze. Lucy, I didn't know you were coming. I wouldn't miss your big night, I said, smiling just as politely. I was just so confused about the family finances, I hoped you could clear it up. Lucy, this is not the time, my father hissed. Oh, but I think it is, I said, turning to Mr. Henderson. You're a numbers man, sir. Maybe you can help me understand. I've been paying the household bills for years, but I'm just a content coordinator. I used her own words. But when I paid this utility bill, I unfolded the first paper. This account mismanagement fee was charged after my payment was confirmed. Do you know how that could happen? Mr. Henderson, obligated by politeness, took the paper. He looked at my payment, then at the fee. Well, he said, frowning, that's odd. This fee is usually for a bounced check or a reversed payment. That's what I thought, I said. But my payment cleared, and then, I added, pulling out the Venmo log. I saw all these business charges, and then this. I held out the paralegal email. This accelerated use property transfer query. It just all seems so complex. I'm so glad Maya stepped in. Maya's charm finally shattered. Her face, which had been a mask of benevolence, contorted. Lucy, you're making a scene. You're humiliated, so you're trying to humiliate me. I'm not humiliated, Maya. I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the din of the party. The jazz music seemed to fade. I'm just presenting the data. Mr. Henderson looked from the email to Maya, his face closing. A property transfer query on your parents' estate. The people around us had gone silent. My mother, seeing the commotion, hurried over, her face a mask of panic. What's going on? My father, ashen, looked at the papers in Mr. Henderson's hand as if they were snakes. He looked at Maya. Maya, what is this? What did you do? And in that moment, seeing her charm fail, seeing her trapped by the cold, hard evidence, all she had left was vitriol. I did what I had to do, she shrieked, her voice cracking. She abandoned us. I'm the one who's here. I'm the one who deserves it. The admission hung in the air, ugly and raw. The holiday lights suddenly seemed too bright, the warm room too cold. The social exposure was total. My mother let out a small, strangled sob, her hand flying to her mouth. My father just stared at Maya, a deep, shuddering realization dawning on his face. The denial had shattered. Accountability had arrived, not with a whisper, but with a public execution. I had won. I had the moral and emotional high ground. My sorrow and outrage had finally been validated, seen by all. But then my father turned his gaze to me. His eyes, for the first time, held no dismissal, no disappointment, only a hollow, desperate guilt. Lucy, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lucy, we didn't know. We didn't. My mother just wept. The victory felt like ash in my mouth. I had reclaimed my dignity, but I had also perhaps destroyed my family. The internal conflict which I thought was over roared back to life. I had won. Now what was I supposed to do with the wreckage? The drive back to my sublet with Jenna was quiet. The snow had stopped and the night felt scrubbed clean, brittle, and cold. "Are you okay?" she finally asked as we pulled up. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest answer I'd ever given. "But I'm not sorry." The fallout from the gala was immediate and devastating, at least for Maya. The family fund was quietly disbanded. Her speech, which was meant to be her coronation, became her social obituary. The whispers that had followed me were now firmly attached to her. Her business ventures, starved of my involuntary funding, evaporated. Her social media, once a curated highlight reel, went silent. She was for the first time in her life facing actual consequences, and she did so alone. Stripped of her charm and my money, there was nothing left for her to leverage. She had become, in the town's eyes, exactly what she was: a failed venture. My parents were a different, more complex kind of aftermath. My father called 3 days later. His voice was thick, humbled. "Lucy, your mother and I, we'd like to talk, if you'd let us." We met at a neutral diner halfway between their house and my apartment. The fluorescent lights were unflattering. The coffee was bitter. It was perfect. They didn't make excuses. Not at first. They just apologized. "We saw what we wanted to see," my mother said, her hands trembling around her mug. "We saw the daughter who was charming and present, and we took the daughter who was capable and responsible for granted. It was easier to lean on you, Lucy. It was lazy and it was cruel." My father nodded, his gaze fixed on the table. "I enabled her. I let her get away with things. I let her hurt you. Because it was easier than confronting her, and maybe I was just guilty for my own failures, for not providing enough." It was a confession, not an absolution. I listened. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't say it's okay. I just said, "I hear you." I maintained my boundaries. I told them I would not be moving back. I told them I would not be resuming my role as the family bank. Our relationship, if it was to be rebuilt, would be on new ground, on a foundation of truth, not obligation. I could see the sorrow in their eyes, but also, for the first time, a glimmer of respect. I spent the next few weeks in my small apartment processing. I felt the profound, aching grief of the family I had lost, but also the quiet, steady thrum of the self I had gained. My worth was not tied to their approval. My emotional health was more important than their holiday peace. I had spent my entire life confusing appeasement with love, and the silence in my new home was the sound of me finally learning the difference. My integrity found an echo in the community. I received a note from Mr. Henderson, a simple card, apologizing for the scene at the gala, but thanking me for my clarity. "Integrity is a rare commodity," he wrote. "Don't let anyone devalue it." I was even asked by the town board to sit on a new committee, one managing actual community outreach grants, because, as they put it, they needed someone who clearly understands a balance sheet. My example, my quiet fight, had resonated. It was a triumph, but a sober one. The catharsis was real, but it was mixed with the sorrow of what I had to do to achieve it. As January thawed into a wet, cold February, I found myself looking ahead. The holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, had been weaponized, used as the backdrop for my humiliation. They were ruined, and I realized I couldn't go back to them, not as they were. But I could reclaim them. I could build new traditions, ones based on chosen family and mutual respect, not on toxic obligation. I called Jenna. "What are you doing for Easter?" I asked. "Or whatever the next holiday is. I don't care. I'm cooking, in my apartment, and you're coming." It wasn't a cliffhanger. It was a transition. I was planning my own celebration, a reclaiming of the calendar on my terms. It was Thanksgiving a year later. My small apartment, the one over the bookstore, was crowded and warm. It smelled of roasted chicken. I'd decided to reclaim, a different bird, and mulled cider. Jenna was here, of course, arguing with my old high school friend Sarah about the best way to mash potatoes. Mr. Henderson and his wife Mary were sitting by the window laughing at a story my coworker from the community board was telling. This was my gathering, my chosen family. There was no fine china, no suffocating tension, no silent contracts of resentment. We were using mismatched plates, and the laughter was real. I looked around at the life I had built from the wreckage, and for the first time I understood what home truly meant. It wasn't the house I'd paid for, it was the boundaries I'd drawn. My growth over the last year hadn't been a straight line. It had been a messy, painful, and ultimately liberating process of unlearning. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval. I no longer saw my value as a function of my utility. I was not the responsible one. I was just me. I had embraced the core American values I'd always admired from afar: resilience, true independence, and the personal freedom to define my own life. I'd learned that moral clarity wasn't a gift, it was a choice you had to keep making. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. A text from my father. "Your mother and I are having a quiet dinner. Just wanted to say we love you, and we're proud of the woman you've become. Happy Thanksgiving, Lucy." I smiled a real, uncomplicated smile. I texted back, "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. Love you too." Our relationship was still a work in progress. It was tentative, marked by careful apologies and the slow, arduous work of rebuilding trust. They were trying. They were going to therapy. My mother had even started volunteering, finding a purpose outside the suffocating confines of their home. Maya was a different story. She was distant, working a retail job in another county, her attempts to control the family estate having been legally and finally shut down by my father. We had not spoken. Maybe we never would, not really. But as I looked at the text from my dad, I realized the minor, lingering tension of that unresolved relationship no longer held any power over me. My peace was not conditional on their healing. I had reclaimed my own story. I walked to the window, cider in hand, and looked out. It was starting to snow, the first real flakes of the season, pure and white, dusting the street below. A year ago, the snow had been my escape, a cold, isolating blanket. Then it had been the backdrop for my reckoning. Tonight it felt different. It was no longer a symbol of hardship endured, but a metaphor for the purity of a path I had cleared with my own two hands. It was a clean slate. The sorrow of my family's betrayal was still there, a thin white scar I would always carry, but it no longer ached. The triumph I felt wasn't loud. It was a deep, quiet, unshakable foundation. "Lucy, come on, we're doing a toast," Jenna called. I turned back to the warmth, back to the laughter. I raised my glass, feeling a profound, steady peace. It was a peace that came not from winning a war against others, but from finally winning myself. And as the new year approached, I was for the first time in my life empowered, unbroken, and entirely free. And with that, Lucy finally found a peace that was truly her own, closing a painful chapter and opening a new one. What part of her transformation resonated with you? We read every single one of your thoughts, so leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.